ECOWAS after meeting with Nigerian Islamic scholars Sheikh Abdullahi Bala Lau in Niger Republic. And the development follows an abortive heads of security chiefs from member states meeting in Accra. And we've been talking about this matter since last week and what it means for the rest of the sub-region. At the table this morning, I've been joined by Dr. Adam Bona, the CEO of Security Warehouse, and he'll be sharing his perspectives with us. Doc, thank you for making time to join us once again.
Thank you.
On our Zoom platform, we'll be joined by Nana Yaumiriku, an international relations analyst with the Legon Center for International Affairs and Diplomacy, LESIAT. He will also be sharing some thoughts with us. Nana, we'll get to you very, very shortly in the course of this chat. Doc, help us understand what this means. Some think it's giving with one hand and taking back with another. Here is a military junta that is in power because it illegally took power according to the ECOWAS and according to the African Union. And immediately the offer for war was on the table. Now troops are on standby. The junta agreed to meet the sheikhs. It appeared that some headway was being made, only for us to hear at dawn today that the president, who has been under house arrest all this while, may face some prosecution. What's your take on this development?
Well, good morning to your viewers. With regards to my view on this has been made public. As far as I'm concerned, dialogue should have been the first option on the table. But unfortunately, once the coup leaders or the junta leaders succeeded in ousting Bazoum, Tinubu wanted to flex some muscles as the chairman of ECOWAS and also, the newly sworn-in president of Nigeria, and also for the fact that he is still contesting his presidency. I'm sure you know some of his competitors have taken him to court in Nigeria, challenging his legitimacy as the president of Nigeria. And so there are several reasons why Tinubu would want to be would want to, not authority, would want to be seen to be relevant and to be seen to be stronger in the eyes of the ordinary persons. But if you ask me, I would say that has seriously misfired, or that has probably hasn't worked the way he thought it would have worked, because then you will realize that the sub-region and right-thinking, citizens of the world, including those of us in Africa and ECOWAS, are united against the big boys club called ECOWAS. Because you notice that as citizens, citizens of ECOWAS, if you ask me what are the benefits we get as citizens, you can barely count them. It's easier to travel from here to France, to maybe the UK, to the US.
But it's still visa-free across West Africa.
What makes it viable? Try it and see. Even when you are light. I mean, I was in Murtala, the airport in you land and they still take money from you. I mean, they sometimes would harass you. And so when you hear visa-free, and it's worse if you have to drive. And so mine is that they've put impediments in the way of ordinary citizens. And for the big boys, they fly in, have their tea at luxury hotels and go back to wherever they are coming from. So they really don't know what is going on the ground.
You think the leadership of ECOWAS is disconnected
disconnected from the reality. It's so disconnected. They are so disconnected from the reality.
But why do you say that? We all live in this sub-region.
We all live in this sub-region. You buy fuel, I buy fuel. Right? Our leaders, they don't buy fuel. They don't even pay taxes. And so they don't know what the ordinary persons has, the struggle we go through every day. And we need to have open, conversations with our leaders. Now you have a no-flight zone declared in, Niger. You have ECOWAS restrictions. And so for largely our mothers and our women who are into trading of onions and other things that are coming from this part of the world, the onions can't come in. Those who have to cook for us to eat need onions for us to cook. The price of onions are going up. And so they don't actually understand. Go to the homes of these leaders, right? I'm trying to move premise my conversation away from the issues of security. I mean, what do you call it? Echo. What I'm trying to situate it and say, our leaders are so disconnected. They don't know what is going on the ground. If not, they would not have some unilateral decision declare war in Niger when they know Niger, is home to a lot of natural resources. I mean, on your table, you have, what's the name? Some water. When I sat here, your colleague before you said this is Galamsey, from Galamsey rivers and lakes. Are we not here? Our rivers and, our rivers and, water bodies are getting destroyed. It's the ordinary persons that will suffer in future. And so mine is that if you declare such a war and you want to send soldiers into a senseless war, the moment we begin to have the soldiers coming back home in body bags, you are going to have internal upheavals in our military bases in Ghana. Right? Go to Burkina Faso. 80% of Burkina Faso is in the hands of rebels, the jihadist movement. And so as far as I'm concerned, if ECOWAS felt they had where is the standby force anyway? Do you know where ECOWAS standby force is? I mean, they keep talking about standby force. You should
tell us. So
I don't know where they are. You see,
so is it the case that when ECOWAS say stand the force by, there are specific numbers or quotas given to countries to say contribute X number of men and women, boots on the ground, who will go and maintain the peace? And what does maintaining the peace even mean? What does it mean to say these soldiers are going to restore constitutional order beyond obviously combating?
Well, my point is that, like I asked, do we know anywhere in West Africa where we have ECOWAS standby force, just like you go to Burma camp?
I'm guessing that countries will be called to contribute.
So that's what I'm trying to say. So you don't say standby force. Standby force means that they are there and training for all these things. But at the moment, Côte d'Ivoire, coincidentally, have contributed 1,000. Because Alassane Ouattara himself is guilty of doing a constitutional coup.
That's a bold claim.
Do you understand me? And so it is in his interest to make sure that the junta leaders in Niger are removed, or else the next place we are likely to have a coup be Côte d'Ivoire.
If people feel the way you feel, that the allegations that you are making, that a certain president, a certain leader has overstretched their powers, then they can take the matter up in court and not just leave it as
which court?
Allegations.
Is it the ECOWAS court? That is where the ECOWAS leaders, pick justices and whatever and put them there. And my point is that the whole thing about ECOWAS is something that we need to relook at. And so as far as I'm concerned, this declaration of war by Tinubu and his colleagues is an illegality. My point is that it's a proxy war. You are sending military officers into Niger, into an uncharted water. I mean, look at how vast Niger is. Where are you going to? And you see, anyone who understands the act of warfare, you are the invading party or parties. You must have 3-4 times the strength of the people you are invading. So plus, minus. You have, the Nigerian, they have about forces, they are 5,000-6,000. If you add their police and the others, maybe approximately 8,000. So you should have, if you are going to do that by 3 or 4 times, you should be dealing with about 22,000-24,000 minimum. Can we mobilize 22, 24, 25,000 armed men with all the material logistics and send, them to Niger? Can we do that? We can't. At the moment as we speak, Burkina Faso, Mali, even Algeria is telling us we don't want to be part of these things because we border, what's the name, Niger. And for us, we don't even border Niger. But if you get out of GBC, drive around, you will find Nigerian children on our street begging for arms. when there is no war going on in Niger. So can you imagine if there is any war, you know, if the first gun is fired in Niger and they begin to come in buses, are you going to drive them away? No. And so mine is that every now and then we hear Burkina Faso, thousands of people have crossed into the Sisala area, into other parts of this country because of jihadist movement in Burkina Faso. So as far as I'm concerned, ECOWAS doesn't even have what it takes to do a proper, restoration of whatever they call constitutional order in Niger. It is just, our big, men, the big, boys club actually trying to exert some authority, which I think they actually don't have. Because the truth is that, you see, the language we are speaking in Ghana, when I say the language, when it comes to this declaration, if you go onto the streets of Ghana, Ghanaians are not interested in sending our soldiers to Niger. The Nigerians are not interested. The other West African citizens are not interested. So you realize that at the moment, even our leaders are caught, they are not too sure what to do.
But I've been educated at the same table that Ghana as a country, as an individual country, cannot say it has its own voice contrary to the voice of ECOWAS. And so once the sub-region declares that this is the direction that the ECOWAS is going, Ghana has no choice but to toe the line. And so those who have come out of the sub-region to appear to show support to the coup makers in Niger are considered to have overstepped their lines. That's what an international relations person has told me, who is also an advisor, UN advisor and a mediator. But let me engage the thoughts of Nanaya quickly from the international, from the Legon Center for International Affairs and Diplomacy, Lesia. Nanaya Amriku, thank you for joining us once again. Last week you were here and we were talking about this exact same thing. You and the other panel member agreed that war was not the way to go and that dialogue should be really where we should be headed. Now the junta has agreed to dialogue and they've met with the sheikhs, but they've also announced that the president could face prosecution for high treason. What are your thoughts now that all these developments are happening at the same time?
Right. Good morning to your viewers and thank you for having me once again. I think I agree largely with what my panel member said earlier on, that I think Tinubu is finding a way to gain recognition internationally and a consolidation of his sovereignty that can translate into local currency in Nigeria is for him to be seen as leading this military intervention in ECOWAS as a form of ego massage. And I think that ECOWAS ought to have been strategic with how they dealt with this issue. It wouldn't have gotten to the point that it has gotten to. Either way, whichever way you look at it, ECOWAS is losing credibility and it doesn't inspire confidence. At this particular moment, they have to swallow their pride and then find some way to engage with the military junta. I have said elsewhere that the use of force or the threat of the use of force should have been the last trump card instead of bringing it up to the very first stage of the nascent stage of negotiation. Of course, if you are threatened to use force, what is the need for negotiations? However, I am very happy that track two diplomacy. There's a reason why they refuse to engage with ECOWAS leaders, and there's a reason why they seem to be gravitating and granting audience to the Islamic scholars in Nigeria. I think ECOWAS ought to know that the junta is biting back at them. Now, the threats to charge President Bazoum with treason, we must understand that this is a game, right? This is real politics, and what it means is that they are ready for negotiation. They are trying to find a way to negotiate, but they need some trump card. They need some negotiation card. At the end of the day, if they are coming to the table to talk to ECOWAS, what do they have in their hand as a bargaining chip, right? And this whole idea of using President Bazoum could be a way out for them. But then again, this is I think it's a strong signal to ECOWAS that they ought to restructure, they ought to reorder, they ought to re-strategize how they deal with this kind of issues. ECOWAS conflict resolution mechanism of 1999 and 2008, is a policy that is, in theory, And anytime such things occur, they just dust it off and try to implement it. I think this is a warning, this is a signal that things ought to be done better. Because you see, he who comes into equity must come with clean hands. This military government in Niger, Burkina Faso, Mali, right? They have seen that ECOWAS in itself, seeking to, be the moral preacher, has not been doing very well. There are so many, like my colleague said, so many constitutional change of government. There are some leaders within ECOWAS that have had to amend their constitution to stay in power, what you call third termism. And yet these are the same people coming back to preach what ought to be done. So I think that going forward, ECOWAS must really put itself together, put its house to order before it tries to direct people its member state as to where to go. Like I said, whichever way you look at it, ECOWAS is going to be bargaining from a losing side. Why am I saying so? You say there's something called standby force. Now, the security expert will let you know that it takes nothing less than 30 to 90 days to strategically and solidly mobilize a military intervention force. Here lies the case. We don't have that kind of force to deal with. Again, you need, like you said, 3 or 4 times the number of the invading force. You need powerful military arsenals. Now, we are talking about an army that has been trained by Western forces for so many decades. They are accustomed to the idea of fighting in the Sahara. How are you going to deal with this thing strategically and decisively, and still win it? We do not want you to touch and leave. Do we have any plan of sustaining President Bassoum's democratic regime when it's been reinstated? How are you going to do that? It is very important. We don't want another Libya in the shores of Africa. This is what they did in Libya, and today Libya is the breeding grounds for terrorists heading towards the Sahel. So we must be strategically how we deal with the Niger. Niger is considered as a frying pan of West Africa. If we do not deal with this issue in Niger and it degenerates, it escalates into what you don't want, it will have rippling effects for countries like Ghana. Are we ready for the inflow of refugees? How is it? What toll is it? What economic toll is it going to take on our budgets? The security issues. And any country that commits its force to ECOWAS, and I think I beg to disagree, the fact that if ECOWAS decides to go one way, and as we speak right now, it is unclear whether Togo is with ECOWAS or not. Yeah. It looks as if they are not. And so even if we have a standby force to intervene, apart from the fact that we don't have the 3 or 4 times size that we need, we don't have the military arsenals, we don't have it is not logistically rational for ECOWAS to be doing this at a particular moment. Wow. It doesn't make any sense.
Nana, let's try to break it down a bit further. The President Bazoum's physical, psychological well-being right now, because you are both international relations people, you are focused on security. What do you think what kind of state is he in? Because Nana mentioned how is he going to now assume the power back if indeed constitutional order is restored to him? Do we have any idea what he might be going through? What kind of access does he have? Because if he's facing trial or he's facing prosecution, then he does he needs to have access to legal counsel, doesn't he?
Well, the truth is that I think we shouldn't be too concerned about his psychological well-being. He's been the president of that country, and the country is the poorest of the poorest. So I think that, you see, as ordinary citizens, we should, in as much as we want to be concerned about the big boys club, we should be much concerned about the ordinary persons on the street of Niamey and then the ordinary persons in Niger.
Nana says he's now become a negotiation card or a bargaining chip.
I'm coming there.
In this war.
I'm coming there. At the moment, I think what ECOWAS should be doing should find a way to get him out of danger.
So let him leave the country.
Let him leave the country, or if he has to stay in the country, if they can, get the junta leaders to put in some safety mechanisms for him to. I don't think it will be too bad for him to attempt to live there. But any attempt to get him stay in power is out of the way.
So perhaps at that negotiation table, when the two parties sit down, one of the topics that they could be discussing is how to secure safe passage for him to any other place.
Exactly. And then what then happens to the junta leaders is very important, because obviously they cannot continue to be, you can't have continuous rule of you want a civilian rule. I mean, those of us who are old enough to have seen 79, what is happening in Niger is not different from what we saw in 79. The people charged up. And anyone who is as old as I am will tell you, they said, let the blood flow.
And the citizens jubilated, like we are seeing in some parts of Niamey, with civilians coming out to show apparent support for Niger. Some people find that even problematic. I've seen people who are even now sewing flags to show solidarity with the Wagner group and Russia's links, and then the former colonial power France, the agitations against France and all that. But now there is an agreement to a dialogue. What are the topics that should be on the table? Nana, Dr. Bonai is saying safe passage for the president and his family should be one of those things. What else do you think this dialogue should entail? Because whilst Niger appears to be cut off from the rest of West Africa, the effects are being felt elsewhere. And for us in Ghana, and for food on our table, the onions are still behind the border.
Right. I think, once again, as we are looking at what happens to President Bazoum and his family, we also know how we should also think of what happens to the junta. What happens to how do we address the issue that in the first instance led them to the coup that we are experiencing now? I think my opinion is that ECOWAS, like it has done in some other countries, must provide a timeline, because it has happened. And we are looking at ways to resolve the issue. So all cards must be on the table. And it includes finding a stipulated amount of time so that the junta could then return the country to democratic rule that we want, but not necessarily the use of force. And I think that once ECOWAS has realized that track 2 diplomacy through the Islamic scholars will work, they should probably find other voices, other opinions that the military junta sort of revere than the former kind of diplomacy made up of ECOWAS members that are threatening them. So I think in the first instance, what happens to President Bazoum and his family, and I like the fact that my colleague in the studio said you shouldn't be worried about this gentleman for too much, because he's been in power for so long and Niger has nothing to show. But then again, it's the issue of human rights, right? We want to, and you should know that so far it's been a bloodless coup, to my knowledge. And so I think the junta is also very cautious that they don't touch what seems to be a bargaining chip for them. So I think President Bazoum is in no way in harm or in danger. The junta is aware, and so they are not touching him. So as we are finding what to do with President Bazoum and his family, what also happens to the military junta? Again, we need a time frame, a timeline, so the country can be returned to constitutional rule. As to whether President Bazoum will be, whether he is a good fit for presidency in Niger, that is another issue. Because the whole argument and the analysis has been that supposedly he's been a puppet for France, and France is ripping Niger for uranium, and Niger has to depend on Nigeria for almost 80% of its electricity. When it is producing the very raw material that you need to be providing electricity. And the economic hardship, Nigerians are feeling the economic pinch of bad policies, of bad government. And so as to whether President Bazoum will be a good fit for presidency, that satisfies the ordinary person in Niger is also another issue. But I think that ECOWAS has to reorder, re-strategize how it deals with these things. And probably maybe from today, if they really want to be taken seriously as a force to reckon with, immediately they have to reconstitute that standby force. They have to put in place logistics. They need the money, the capital to keep these forces on in case it turns into a protracted conflict, so that it would be seen as only backing but able to bite. It must be seen as a force to reckon with.
Right.
And ECOWAS should not be hijacked by leaders that are seeking to propagate or entrench themselves for international recognition. I think it's very important that we look at this perspective also.
But do you see, Dr. Abona, do you see this protracting? Because this is the junta that said, well, we've done this, and in the initial stages they said, well, we are not talking to these people. Now they've welcomed the scholars, they've had a sit down, they are in some kind of negotiations. What may have caused this turnaround, do you think, to now agree, as against initial hesitation or refusal to even engage at all? And what do you think is the way forward? Do you see this as going on for a long time, using what's happening in other countries as a yardstick? Military governments have taken over. There's a transitional period, which usually, I'm told, goes beyond at least 2 years.
Well, you know what ECOWAS did, which hasn't favored them. When I say ECOWAS, the leaders, Tinubu, President Tinubu, attempted to do, which has not favored them and might jeopardize, going forward. Any serious negotiation has to do with bringing the use of force first instead of attempting a dialogue.
But ECOWAS has always said that dialogue is the route they would pursue. But some have suggested at this table that perhaps because war is a catchy bit of the press release, the news media outlets picked on that to lead the story. And so it became the center rather than the option. Do you agree?
No. ECOWAS actually literally has declared war. It's so on, has declared war on Niger. It's not the media. I mean, I have had conversations with security chiefs. I've had conversations with, in fact, before even CDS left Ghana to, Abuja to go and have the security chiefs meeting, the first leg of meeting, I was in his office. We had conversations here and there. I have had some meeting with the Ambassador Baba Wakil, the ECOWAS, rep in Ghana, the commission rep in Ghana. I've had some meetings with him. So what I'm trying to say is that it is not the media propagating or, twisting and turning when it comes to war. It was a declaration of war that we are giving you. I mean, once you give a timeline, 7 days, to restore the country back to constitutional rule, or we are coming in. I mean, ECOWAS is behaving like the usual, paper tiger, where everything is on paper, but in real sense, they don't have the force it needs to be able to do anything. And the reason is that they themselves, have been very hypocritical. Well, do you know what is happening in the Gambia? Look at Senegal. Some of these coups, one of the mediators included Alassane Ouattara. We all know how Alassane Ouattara became president when his colleague had to face the ICC. Eventually, they sat there, want Alassane Ouattara to change the constitution. And so mine is that if you have these leaders attempting to go into Niger and now take some steps back, which I think they should eat, like my colleague said, it's a humble pie. Cool head. Better still, maybe the leaders at that level shouldn't even be those engaging in this mediation. They shouldn't be those, because they've lost respect that the ordinary person would have given them, or the junta leaders would have accorded them. Because now, if you know what happened in Liberia, we are sending men in, we will bring all the men, and then when the body bags started coming in, how, what is his name? Sergeant Doe, he died. And so all these things ran through junta leaders, their heads. And so mine is that it would have been prudent. There are a lot of aspects when it comes to, international negotiations, and really, they should get some. For instance, why do you think the Islamic scholars were allowed into Niger? At least they are giving us some glimmer of hope when it comes to, would diplomacy work? But if I was a junta leader and Tinubu, who is fighting for his legitimacy, he's trying to gain some relevance, locally and internationally, is the one who is still leading ECOWAS as a chairman, right? If tomorrow the courts in Nigeria declares Tinubu's, term in office or his stay in power as illegitimate,
has that happened before?
I'm only saying. There's always the first time, and so mine is that ECOWAS leaders should take some steps back, see if they can engage people who probably are not heads of states. When I say heads, because the heads of state, most of them are tainted. Most of them have watched on for a lot of things to happen in the sub-region. At the moment, we all notice the proxy war. Do you get what I'm saying? It's a proxy war, which is being fought for a big brother called France and, probably the Americans in a way. And so mine is that you saw the flag of France and other countries, they stepping on them and burning them. That is not a good signal. And so mine is that we want to see how dialogue would work. Instead of trying to use force. Force has never been used to be, force has never worked. And so they should use people who can go in there, people that they believe the junta leaders will trust. But at the moment, the junta leaders do not trust them. You can see that the Islamic scholars, when ECOWAS leaders attempted to go in there, they drove them out.
Were turned away.
They drove them out. But you see, when the Islamic scholars said, we want to meet you, they opened their doors. And as we speak, are you aware that if you go on the aircraft tracker, even though a no-flight zone has been declared in the whole of Niger, there are aircraft that are coming from Istanbul once a while into Niamey. Do we know what it is coming with? We know Turkey has its own stake in Niger. And so mine is that let's be very careful. And like my colleague said, Paris or France and the Americans and the Western superpowers have trained the forces in Niger. People you trained, and then today you have a weak ECOWAS saying that they are going in there to go and remove these people. It is going to be a bloody confrontation, and some of us would insist that let's not send our army in and get them killed. No.
I want to pick Nana's thoughts on this, perhaps your final submission. What should we expect in the coming days? While all this is going on, this morning on the BBC, a critical question was asked that if sanctions are imposed, who are the ones who suffer? And a lot of people think that it's the ordinary people. So whilst all this power struggle is going on, there's a looming crisis that is happening with food shortages, which will cause the already volatile situation of food prices to be even worse. So what should we expect, and how soon should we expect things to start looking a bit more favorable? Is Nana still with us?
I think he needs to unmute.
Nana, I think that you've muted your sound, so you need to let us hear you.
Am I audible now?
Go on now.
Okay, so I think if international relations and international politics are anything to go by, we've realized that sanctions don't actually affect the leaders that ought to have suffered from it, but the ordinary citizens, right? Ordinary people on the street. And as it stands now, the sanctions are beginning to bite, not only bite in Niger, but bite neighboring countries, as you've said. How prices of some basic commodities are skyrocketing. And I think that if we really want to ameliorate the situation immediately, the kind of diplomacy that we are engaging should be fast-tracked before issues get out of hands. Diplomacy is always the way to go. There is no other way with this than negotiation, than dialogue. And I think that once there is some hope that this could be done, we must really pursue it to the fullest levels than to be deceived by the idea of the use of force without understanding the repercussions or the consequences. You could always predict how war begins, but you cannot predict how they end. It might not be a walk through the field like ECOWAS probably thinks it can. So I think diplomacy ought to be the way to go. And Ghana, like again, if track one diplomacy is basically the use of official government officials, right? The former kind of diplomacy that we know. The former diplomacy, track one is not going to work. Let us use track two diplomacy. At least we've seen that it's going to work. We've seen that the junta is ready to listen to government officials. So I think it is the way to go and see what happens in the days ahead, so that the crisis does not degenerate and ordinary people. I think it's also good for countries around Niger, African countries in general. And here I'm not an expert in that field, but how can we have buffer stock? To what extent can we also begin to think of what happens? Like recently, what happened with COVID? COVID opened us up to so many things. We realized that we could manufacture certain things without necessarily having to rely on the West to import them. So there's been one or two. There's been Niger. There's been Burkina Faso. There's Mali. Neighboring countries. To what extent can we also begin to produce some of these things that we heavily rely on other countries to produce, so that in case of these kind of eventualities, we know that our food security is guaranteed. Other aspects of our human security are also guaranteed because we were proactive, and not reactionary, like we are seeing ECOWAS do. ECOWAS is providing knee-jerk responses, reactionary instead of being proactive. I think that might be what I'll have to add to the way forward.
Nana, thank you. These are a few thoughts that we are getting from people who are watching us on our screens via WhatsApp number 05555610034. Their thoughts and not the thoughts of any of us here at GBC, but quite strong sentiment. It tells you that even for us in Ghana, people feel quite strongly about the sentiment you've talked about, with ECOWAS not seeming to be disconnected from the regular man on the street. Rasbengi thinks that ECOWAS is just a bunch of old folks who have nothing better to offer their people, but they are only playing puppetry to France, which people will be happy to see what France is doing to Niger by stealing their resources and making the people poor. Say no to France bullying Niger. Rasbengi sent that message from Accra. All Francophone countries must rise up and liberate themselves from France and take their destiny into their own hands and stop sending their budgets to France for approval. Alhaji Haruna sent us that from Ashaiman. This might sound quite drastic, so these are his thoughts, saying that democracy is not good for Africa and the only thing that can move Africa forward is to hand it over back to the white man. He thinks that they will take our resources, but we will at least see good roads, good infrastructure, good health, good schools. Colonization guided by a set of rules and conditions is the only thing that will move Africa forward. Anything else is just a joke. And these are the thoughts of Machiavelli. Thank you for sending your thoughts across to us. Dr. Abuna, Nana has told us what to expect in the coming days, perhaps in a few weeks, on what the situation is in Niger. But now that the chiefs of the defense institutions or the heads of the military from ECOWAS countries are no longer meeting in Abuja, and you've talked about we need a force, and they need to, Nana said we need about 90 days to prep them. Do you think that force will still be needed for a just-in-case situation? Because now people are beginning to get more and more apprehensive about what's going to happen during the period of dialogue and negotiations.
Well, you see, violence should not be, it should be something that we shouldn't even be ready to discuss. It should be off the table. Because at the end of the day, just like the previous speaker, Nana, said, you see, it is the ordinary person who would suffer. At the moment, look at Niger from Ghana. It is some blocks away, but we are feeling the pinch in Ghana, right? And so mine is that let's not play into the hands of, France and the rest.
But can we see it from perhaps the ECOWAS perspective to say that has dialogue worked in the other places where there's been a coup? The situation is still continuing, and so perhaps they thought a more firmer hand to issue a more sternly worded statement, or to bring whip people into action to return the country to democracy is needed, considering that all these threats of war and threats of sanctions and actual sanctions have not worked in other countries in the past.
Well, you see, but the truth is that if you sit claiming that constitution is only when someone who is not wearing uniform is ruling or governing, then you are wrong. I cited the example of France, right? Mine is that the ECOWAS structure must change. as we sit today, or as we are today, there is something called ECOWAS Parliament. Ask me who are those who represent us at the ECOWAS Parliament. It is my parliamentarian and your parliamentarian who are sent there to go and meet at something that is called ECOWAS Parliament. And it only provides an advisory, they are only an advisory body to ECOWAS. And so mine is that the fundamentals are wrong when it comes to the structure of ECOWAS. Let's take some steps back and relook at it. Are we saying that when there is a constitutional coup, that is legitimate, but when there is a military coup, that is illegitimate? It is something that we are not discussing in all this conversation we are having, because largely you have had leaders who have watched on for some of their colleagues to change the constitution, usually with the aid of Big Brother who is sitting somewhere. So until such a time that we are able to, have ECOWAS structures so that it benefits the ordinary citizen within the bloc, it is going to be very difficult. Because this question you are asking me, I tell you what, ECOWAS shouldn't be discussing the use of force, because you see, go to the Francophone countries. Why do you think we have, what's the name, the Sahel is in turmoil? I mean, Tinubu, who is leading this charge, but has he been able to eradicate Boko Haram in his backyard?
Let's wrap it up.
If you go to Boku, at the moment, people are dying daily in Boku. We have not been able to deal with our own challenges. We say we are fighting Galamsey. We haven't been able to deal with it. What is our business? Going to ask people who feel that they are asking a certain, illegitimate...
Because once one government is in crisis, the whole sub-region...
No, it's not true. Mine is that it is a big boys club, and they've sat and watched some of their colleagues to arm twist and change constitutions to entrench themselves in power. You see, once the people rise up, it becomes difficult for them to gain legitimacy, and that is what we are seeing. So I back what is going on in Niger, just that dialogue should take place, and the whole of the Francophone countries. I think that they should do what they have to do to refight for their independence, because, as we said, you think that we will draw up our budget and go and show it to Britain or the King of England that we need you to give us approval. That is what is going on in this Francophone country. We should support them to go independent.
Thank you for making time to join us. Nana Yao, I'll just give you 10 seconds to make your final submissions. We are quickly running out of time.
Right, thank you. I think that at the end of the day, former French colonies ought to win their independence again from France, because it seems to be one of the things that is making the kind of coups we are having from them rampant. So I think we have to support them in any way that they can, for them to rid themselves of this new colonial atmosphere that they find themselves in. This is decolonizing international relations in Africa.
Thank you for making time.
ECOWAS has to support former French colonies to really win their independence, and the kind of barbaric relationship that France seems to be imposing on them is very, very important,
Nana,
in my perspective.
I'm sure we'll have you again to discuss this matter further. Nana Yao is an international relations analyst with the Legon Center for International Affairs and Diplomacy, LESIA. Then Dr. Adam Buna is the CEO of Security Warehouse. Doc, thank you for making time to join us once again. The situation in Niger continues to bother a lot of people, and we entreat all of you to keep the tempers down. Let dialogue prevail. No war in ECOWAS, no war anywhere in Africa is what we should all support. Thank you for making time. Breakfast returns after this break with the ever beautiful Abiana.